his dented chest plate and let it fall to the floor, standing in the silence of the armory as 8 years of service ended in a single quiet heartbeat. Overseer Vexia stood in the shadow of the doorway, her multifaceted eyes tracking the movement with a clinical, cold detachment. The metal struck the deck with a finality that seemed to echo through the very hull of the starship. If the weight of a life can be measured in the silence that follows a choice, then Kalen has just become the heaviest man in the sector. Do you think loyalty is something that can be discarded, or does it leave a permanent mark? Stick around to see how this silence reshapes a world. Now, let's go back to where the cracks first started to show. 6 months ago, the air in the Xylos outpost had tasted of copper and ozone. Kalen sat on a munitions crate, his hands trembling as he tried to wipe the blue-black ichor from his knuckles. Beside him, a young private named Miller was cooling, his eyes fixed on a ceiling he would never see again. Kalen had held the boy while the light went out, promising him it mattered. He had to believe it mattered. The coalition forces moved like clockwork around the carnage. Vexia had approached then, her bioluminescent skin pulsing with a calm, rhythmic violet that felt like an insult to the frantic thudding in Kalen's chest. She didn't look at the body. She looked at the tactical display on her wrist, her voice a series of melodic clicks that translated into a flat, synthesized monotone. "The objective is secure," she had said, her gaze finally drifting to the blood on Kalen's fatigues. "The expenditure was within acceptable margins. Your species truly possesses a remarkable affinity for the terminal gesture." Kalen looked up, his jaw tight. He was 19, Vexia. He wasn't an expenditure. He was a variable that functioned as intended, she replied. The realization didn't hit him like a physical blow. It was more like a slow, freezing tide. Every drop of blood spilled, every human heart that had stopped beating in the dark corners of the galaxy, wasn't being honored as a sacrifice. It was being tallied as a resource. To the coalition, humans weren't brothers in arms or partners in a grand alliance. They were simply the sharpest, most disposable blades in the rack. Why do we give so much to those who see us as so little? Vexia stepped closer, the light of the armory reflecting off the silver insignia on her collar, the same one Kalen wore. She spoke with a terrifying lack of malice, as if explaining a law of physics. "We don't pity you because you're weak," she murmured, the translator humming. "We pity you because you're so eager to die for a species that doesn't know your name." Kalen didn't argue. There was no point in shouting at a storm. Instead, he reached for his shoulder straps. He began to strip the high-grade polymer casing from his limbs, the interlocking plates clicking as they were uncurled. The armor hit the bench with a heavy thud, the sound of 8 years of loyalty being discarded piece by piece. The silence in the armory wasn't empty. It was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against Vexia's iridescent skin as Kalen walked away, leaving 8 years of history cooling on a metal bench. He didn't look back. Months later, the dust of a colony world called Oakhaven filled his lungs instead of recycled ship air. He spent his days hauling lumber, his hands calloused by wood rather than triggers. It was a simple, quiet existence, until the sky turned the color of a bruised lung. The hollowed had arrived. They didn't negotiate, they simply unmade. When the coalition's local garrison fled, citing strategic preservation of assets, the colonists looked to the man who spent his afternoons fixing their fences. "I'm not a soldier anymore," Kalen told the town council, his voice raspy from a day in the sun. "We don't need a soldier," a shopkeeper replied, leaning against a post. "We need a neighbor who knows how to fight." He didn't call the high wardens. Instead, he sent a pulse across the civilian bands, a message to every veteran who had ever felt like a disposable variable. They came, in rusted freighters, mining haulers, and repurposed shuttles. They didn't come because a high warden commanded it. They came because a neighbor asked. The battle for the Xylos homeworld was a chaotic, beautiful mess. While the coalition's fleet stayed in rigid formation, calculating the probability of loss, Kalen's free companies ignored the math entirely. They dove through the atmospheric thermals of the gas giant, using the high-pressure turbulence to mask their approach. a maneuver no coalition pilot would attempt because it defied every standard safety protocol. Beneath the swirling clouds, they struck. Kalen's freighter, the Wayward, led the charge. They didn't target the enemy ships. They targeted the logic of the invasion. By overloading their own gravity drives, the volunteer fleet created a series of localized microsingularities. In scientific terms, this exploited the Pauli exclusion principle on a macro scale, essentially forcing the enemy's dense siege engines to occupy the same physical space as the surrounding debris. The result was a cascading collapse of the enemy's front line. A weapon is used, a partner is chosen. In the aftermath, the smoke hadn't even cleared from the Xylos capital when Vexia's shuttle landed. She stepped out, her violet skin pale, almost gray. She found Kalen sitting on the ramp of his scarred ship, cleaning a smudge of grease from a small, dented locket, the only thing he'd carried since Miller died. Vexia stopped 5 paces away. She didn't look at her tactical display. She looked at him. Slowly, she reached up and unclipped the silver insignia from her collar, the mark of her rank and her species' superiority. She held it in her palm, offering to take it off just to speak to him as an equal. "I calculated the probability of your arrival at 0, she said, her translator clicking softly. "I was wrong. About the math. About everything. You are not weapons." Kalen looked at the silver bird in her hand, then back at his own scarred knuckles. "The apology is noted, Vexia. But keep your pin." "You won't return to the coalition?" she asked. "No," Kalen said, standing up and looking at the horizon where his ragtag fleet was already prepping for the jump home. "We've decided we like picking our own fights." Weeks later, Kalen sat on his balcony on Oakhaven, watching the twin suns dip below the treeline. He held the locket in his hand, its metal warm from the sun. He wasn't waiting for a signal or an order. He was just a man in a chair, finally understanding that his value wasn't a number in a ledger. It was a choice. The light faded, leaving the world in a soft, golden peace.